patriotic Americans serving in ATF trying to stop violent criminals from moving drugs.
Isolated sale from somebody who is not engaged in the business of dealing firearms, you don't need a license.
All right. Would the director agree that there have been times where ATF have not gotten it right?
The Second Amendment has been interpreted numerous times by the Supreme Court, just as you, there's more to it, but yes.
Would the director agree that there have been times where ATF have not gotten it right?
Roy critiques Biden's nominee. Chip Roy has issued a staunch critique of President Biden's nomination of David Chipman to lead ATF. In a statement, Roy condemns the nomination as evidence of Biden's disregard for Second Amendment rights. He accuses Biden of unveiling an arm control strategy that Chipman will spearhead, characterized by what Roy perceives as attempts to confiscate arms and belittle the fundamental right to self-defense.
Patriotic Americans serving in ATF trying to stop violent criminals from moving drugs.
Work for a law enforcement agency. I'm not a judge.
But I
accept the rulings of the court, including that one. I'm not dodging your question.
Do you believe that the federal government should maintain a registry?
ATF from keeping a registry, and we do not. Again, we obey the law. We don't make the law, we obey it.
Of firearms conducted by the American people, such that you would know what firearms I possess.
Roy's opposition to Chipman stems from what he labels as the nominee's radical stance on arm control. Roy paints Chipman as an extremist who advocates for the banning of arms commonly owned by Americans for sporting and self-defense purposes. Roy invokes the sanctity of the Second Amendment, asserting that anyone who fails to grasp its significance is unfit to lead the ATF. He calls upon senators who value the right to self-defense enshrined in the Constitution to reject Chipman's nomination. Despite his criticism of Chipman, Roy acknowledges and commends the efforts of ATF agents in combating violent crime and preserving public safety. However, his reservations about Chipman's nomination revolve around the nominee's stance on constitutional rights and arms regulation. During discussions with the ATF director, Roy raises pertinent questions about Chipman's views on the Second Amendment and federal arms policies. He seeks clarification on whether the director acknowledges the individual right of Americans to keep and bear arms, to which the director affirms that the Supreme Court has upheld this right. Roy probes further into ATF practices, questioning whether the agency advocates for a federal arms registry. The director responds that Congress has prohibited such registries, and the ATF abides by this legal framework. The conversation then shifts to the nuances of arms sales regulations, particularly concerning the licensing requirements for private sellers.
You, as the director, believe that the federal government should track ownership of firearms?
Isolated sale from somebody who is not engaged in the business of dealing firearms, you don't need a license.
All right. If I want to sell a gun that I currently own to a friend in Texas, do I need a license?
You have said we cannot have a registry. We follow that provision and will continue to.
Should we track ownership of firearms?
As director of ATF, my position is if it's in the law, we follow it.
The director explains that individuals not engaged in the business of selling arms do not need a license for isolated sales. Expressing concern over the complexity and clarity of ATF regulations, Roy suggests that average citizens may struggle to navigate the legal requirements when selling firearms. In response, the director highlights the comprehensive guidance provided by ATF regulations. In his critique of Chipman's nomination and his inquiries into ATF policies, Rep. Chip Roy underscores the importance of upholding Second Amendment rights while ensuring responsible arm regulation. Roy's statements reflect his commitment to safeguarding constitutional freedoms and holding government agencies accountable for their adherence to the law. Roy's Second Amendment protection. Republican Chip Roy of Texas has introduced a new bill aimed at safeguarding Second Amendment rights and curbing what he perceives as overreach by ATF. Dubbed the No Backdoor Gun Control Act, the legislation seeks to prevent the ATF from reclassifying certain arms under the National Firearms Act as any other weapon, thereby subjecting them to federal registration and taxation requirements. The bill, unveiled on Wednesday, proposes the removal of the category of any other weapon from the statutory language of the NFA. Additionally, it mandates the ATF to destroy all registration records related to AOW within a year of the bill's enactment. Roy's initiative comes amid concerns over the ATF's broad regulatory authority and its potential impact on arm owners. The ATF defines any other weapon as arms or devices capable of being concealed on the person and capable of discharging a shot through explosive energy. This includes certain arms, revolvers, and weapons with combination shot, arm, and rifle barrels of specific lengths.
Getting into the specifics of the rule, which is in litigation. So
And
first of
this
all,
ought to be a really simple question.
I understand. Respectfully, I believe that the rule that we have promulgated provides way more information and clarity.
Would the director agree that there have been times where ATF have not gotten it right? Might not understand what they are allowed to do under the law when the director of the ATF can't look at a member of Congress and tell me yes or no, there is an individual constitutional right to bear arms.
Yes, there is one. The Supreme Court has said it.
Roy argues that his bill is part of a broader effort to rein in the ATF's regulatory power, citing other legislative proposals aimed at removing short-barreled shot arms and rifles from NFA regulation. However, he contends that without additional safeguards, these efforts could be undermined, leaving room for potential abuse by anti-arm administrations. Asserting the fundamental right to self-defense, Roy emphasizes the need to protect law-abiding arm owners from what he perceives as government overreach. He accuses the ATF, under the Biden administration, of targeting Second Amendment rights and vows to defend against such encroachments. While Roy acknowledges the challenges of passing such legislation in the current political climate, he views it as an opportunity to highlight the contrasting positions of Republicans on arm rights. He suggests that while many Democrats may downplay their support for arm control ahead of elections, their ideological commitment to restricting firearm ownership remains steadfast. Roy anticipates that if Democrats maintain or strengthen their position in Congress, they will likely pursue stricter arm control measures, potentially leveraging agencies like the ATF to advance their agenda. In contrast, Republicans, buoyed by support for pro-Second Amendment legislation, are unapologetic about their stance on protecting arm rights and are positioning themselves to make it a campaign issue. With nearly 24 GOP co-sponsors already backing the bill, Roy's initiative signals a concerted effort by conservatives to solidify support for Second Amendment rights. The legislation not only offers potential relief for millions of arm owners, but also underscores the importance of the arm rights debate in shaping electoral outcomes. In the lead-up to the midterms, Republicans appear undeterred in championing pro-Second Amendment policies, signaling their commitment to preserving individual freedoms and pushing back against perceived government overreach. Roy's bill is poised to be a focal point of conservative campaigns, as candidates seek to rally support for a robust Second Amendment majority in Congress. Congressional dialogue on arm rights. During a recent session, Republican Representative Chip Roy of Texas engaged in a dialogue with the director of the ATF regarding various issues concerning arm rights and regulations. Roy began by expressing his appreciation for the ATF's efforts in combating violent crime and acknowledged his previous work with the agency during his tenure as a prosecutor under Project Safe Neighborhoods. However, Roy raised concerns about instances where the ATF may have erred in its actions, citing examples such as the controversial Fast and Furious operation. He emphasized the importance of accountability and improvement within the agency.
The American people have a constitutional right, an individual right, to keep and bear arms.
Of course, like any agency, there are times where we don't get things right and can improve.
You're saying that's an investigation, but what about something like Fast and Furious?
The Second Amendment has been interpreted numerous times by the Supreme Court, just as there's more to it, but yes.
I understand, and I realize I'm over my time. Do you understand why the average citizen sitting out there saying, I've got 400 pages of rulemaking?
I interpret all the laws the way that the Supreme Court says they're to be interpreted.
Roy then posed a series of questions to the ATF director regarding the interpretation of constitutional rights and federal arms policies. He sought clarification on whether the director believed in the individual right of Americans to bear arms, to which the director affirmed the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Second Amendment. Next, Roy inquired about the ATF's stance on maintaining a federal firearms registry. The director reiterated that Congress has explicitly forbidden the ATF from keeping such a registry, and the agency complies with this legal mandate. Roy further questioned whether the federal government should track arm ownership among the American people. The director reiterated that the ATF follows the law as passed by Congress, including provisions prohibiting the establishment of a firearms registry. Roy then delved into the issue of licensing requirements for arms sales, particularly in cases of private transactions. He presented hypothetical scenarios to illustrate his concerns about the clarity and complexity of ATF regulations. The director emphasized the importance of examining the totality of circumstances in determining whether an individual needs a license to engage in arms sales. Throughout the exchange, Roy expressed frustration with what he perceived as ambiguity and lack of clarity in ATF regulations. He highlighted the challenges faced by average citizens in understanding their rights and obligations under the law. In response, the ATF director defended the agency's regulatory framework, stating that it provides more information and clarity than the concise language of congressional statutes. He emphasized the ATF's commitment to thorough evaluation of each case to ensure compliance with existing regulations. The dialogue between Roy and the ATF director underscores the ongoing debate surrounding arm rights and in the U.S. While Roy advocates for greater transparency and simplicity in arm laws, the ATF director defends the agency's approach to enforcing existing regulations within the bounds of congressional mandates. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.